Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Zenaida Gould, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, or MACRI. MACRI is the only national organization dedicated to collecting and sharing Mexican American civil rights history, American history that everyone should know. We're excited to partner with the San Antonio Public Library for another event to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Mendez versus Westminster. If you missed our earlier event, you can find it in our YouTube library. Also, before we introduce our guests, I want to welcome students from Las Palmas Elementary and the Edgewood Independent School District who are joining us today. Welcome, Bobcats. Their school purchased a copy of today's book for each participating child, and also we were able to provide additional classroom copies for the school. So we're so happy you're with us today, Las Palmas. I'd like to introduce Emily from the San Antonio Public Library Latino Collections and Resource Center. Emily.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Flores. I am the manager of the Latino Collection and Resource Center here at the Central Branch of the San Antonio Public Library. And it is my honor to introduce children's librarian Ana Menchaca from the Forest Hills branch. We hope that everyone can keep up with our latest events and participate in summer reading, which will be starting very shortly. You can check out the latest events at www.mysapl.org. Teachers, thank you for joining us. Teachers, I would ask you to type your names and class grade in the chat, just so that we know that you are with us today. Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce our special guest today, Duncan Tonatiuh. He is an award-winning author and illustrator. He is both Mexican and American. He grew up in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, and graduated from Parsons School of Design and the Eugene Lang College in New York City. The illustrations in his books are influenced by pre-Columbian art, which you'll learn more about today, and the themes in his stories relate to the Latino experience with subjects that include social justice issues, art, history, and immigration. We're so happy to have you with us today, Duncan. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes. So, Duncan, I'd like to just turn it over to you, and perhaps you could just start off by telling us a little bit about the inspiration for writing this book, Separate is Never Equal, and anything else you would like to share with us. And then Ana will be moderating a conversation with the audience.
Excellent. Yes. So Separate is Never Equal, or there's a version in Spanish, Separados no somos iguales. It's a book I wrote and illustrated. It was published in 2014. And I first learned about the Mendes case probably in 2012. So it's something that I learned about relatively recently, and definitely, very shortly before I made the book. But when I first heard about the case, it was actually my editor at Abrams that mentioned the case, because he had edited a different book for young readers about Brown versus Board of Education. And in that case, the author mentioned the Mendes case very briefly. And so he said, I learned about this. I think it'd be something that you might be interested in, because I know you care about Latino history, about social justice. And so that's when I first heard about the story, about the case. And I tried to learn more about it, on things I could find online and articles and books. And I thought that was a very important piece of American history that more people should know about. And so I was I wanted to make a book about it. And then while I was kind of still researching and learning about the case, I was actually at the Texas Book Festival in Austin. I was invited because I had done a different book, a book called Pancho and the Coyote. But while I was there, Sylvia Mendes was also there. And so I actually had a chance to hear her speak, to ask her questions, to meet her. And so it sort of worked out very organically. I guess what I'll do now is just maybe share the book very briefly for those of you that maybe don't know the story, and just kind of tell you a little bit about it, so in case anyone hasn't seen it. So let me try and share my screen. Hopefully this will work well. So I'm assuming everyone can see the image there. But the story starts here, and this is Sylvia, and it's her first day at this new school, at the Westminster School. And this boy points at her and says, "You don't belong here. Go back to the Mexican school." And Sylvia is very upset when the boy says that, and she doesn't want to talk to any of the other kids in her class. And when she comes home to school, she says, "Mom, I don't want to go to that school anymore. The kids are mean." But then her mom says to her, "Sylvia, ¿qué no sabes que por eso luchamos? Don't you know that is why we fought?" And so then the book remembers, throughout the book, Sylvia remembers everything that had to happen so that she could attend this school, the Westminster School. And so she remembers how her family moved from the city of Santana to this farm they were leasing in the city of Westminster, that her family was leasing in Westminster. And then how they went to enroll at the local public school, and they went with Sylvia's aunt Soledad. Her two brothers also went with her, and her two cousins, Alice and Virginia. But when they arrived to the school, the secretary said to Sylvia's aunt that Sylvia and her brothers couldn't attend that school, that they had to go to the Mexican school. And so Sylvia couldn't understand why she had to go to a Mexican school, to a different school. She was like, I'm an American, and then she wondered, is it because of the color of my skin? Is it because my last name is Mendes? And Sylvia's aunt Soledad, she didn't think that was right, and she was very upset. And so she went and told Sylvia's father what had happened. And Sylvia's father went and talked with the superintendent of the school, but they said the same thing to him. They said, your children, the Mendes children, have to go to the Mexican school. And so then Sylvia and her brothers, they went to the school on Olive Street that everyone called the Mexican school, because that's where the Mexican-American children, the Latino children were sent to school. And the school was a clapboard shack. The students had to eat their lunch outside. It was next to this cow field, and that had electricity running through it. So if any of the kids touched the wires, they would receive a shock. But the worst thing was that the teachers at the school expected the kids to drop out by the time they were in 8th grade. So they didn't pay much attention to their education. But Sylvia's family, they weren't happy about this, and they tried to make a petition and get other families involved, but other families were scared to sign a petition because they thought they would get in trouble if they did that. And eventually, Mr. Mendes met a truck driver, came to his farm to pick up produce. They were talking, and he told them about a lawyer named David Marcus, who had a public pool in the nearby city of San Bernardino, because at the time it wasn't only schools, but there were also other public places like theaters, like public schools that were segregated, and Mexican American children, African American children, different kinds of people, sometimes Asian American children, could not access them or could only use them on certain dates. And so then Mr. Mendes started working with Mr. Marcus, and they tried getting other families involved in this case, because it wasn't only Sylvia and her brothers that were sent to a separate school. It was many children in the area, in Orange County in Southern California. And this was something that was happening in Orange County, but it happened throughout California and in other states like Texas, Arizona, and other places in the Southwest. And in the meantime, Sylvia's mother, Felicitas, had to drive the tractor and do all the things that Mr. Mendes usually did at the farm. And the Mendes family got other families involved, the Palomino family, the Estrada family, different families that from different towns in Orange County that tried to join this case. And then on March 2nd, 1945, Mr. Marcus went to the courthouse in Los Angeles and filed a lawsuit. And so the Mendes family and the other families and different superintendents from the different school had to go to court. There was a trial, and the different lawyers would ask questions to people, and people had to come up to the stand. And I think it was on the first day, they asked questions to Mr. Kent, who was in charge of some of the schools. And, you know, Mr. Marcos asked him, why do you send the Mexican-American children to a different school? And he said it was because of language, because they didn't know the language properly. But Sylvia, you know, she was upset by this because she knew how to speak English well. No one had given her a test or anything. So that wasn't true. And then they kept asking questions to Mr. Kent, and he started saying some very mean things, that the Mexican children were inferior in their ability to learn and their ability to behave, that they had problems with lice, that they had dirty hands and faces. And the Mendes family and the other families were shocked when he said those things, but that was a very common attitude at the time. The trial continued for several more days. They didn't ask questions to Silvia, but they asked questions to a different girl, a girl named Carol Torres, that was a little older and demonstrated she could speak English perfectly well. So that wasn't the real reason why she was being sent to a separate school. And they asked questions to Silvia's parents, to the superintendent of the Westminster School. They also asked questions to some university professors that tried to explain to the judge why it was bad to divide children and how it makes one group feel superior and one group feel inferior, and why it's important for children to go to school together. And so the judge, a man named McCormick was his last name, he had to decide who should win this case. And it took almost a year to decide, but eventually the Mendes family won the case. And the news appeared on local newspapers. The Mendes family and the other families were very happy, but they didn't have much time to celebrate, because then the school board, the people in charge of all the schools in Orange County, decided to appeal the case. And they wanted a different judge to review the case and change the decision. And so a group of judges in Northern California and San Francisco reviewed the case, but while they were reviewing it, they received these letters that different organizations sent, the different lawyers that represented different organizations sent. And there were people that had never met the Mendes family personally, but that they thought that, you know, what they were fighting for, that they should win. And so some of these groups were LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Japanese American Citizens League, the American Jewish Congress. And eventually the judges in the Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Mendes and the other Latino families again on April 15, 1947. And that June, the governor of California signed a law saying that children should be allowed to go to school together regardless of race, ethnicity, or language. And so here, Sylvia, and it's her second day at this school, at the Westminster School. The book begins like this. This is her first day. And then she remembers all that had to happen so that she could go to that school. And on the second day, she realizes that there's other kids that want to be nice to her, that want to be her friend. And by the end of the school day, she makes a friend. And by the end of the day, she makes a friend. By the end of the school year, she makes lots of friends. And she feels very proud to be attending that school because her family fought hard to make that happen. And here in the back of the book, I have a few pictures of Sylvia when I think she's 11 years old here in this picture. There's a photograph of her some years ago when she received the Medal of Freedom from President Obama for all her accomplishments and for her family's courage. There's a picture of her father and her mother, Gonzalo Mendes and Felicitas. This is the Westminster School where she wasn't allowed to go to school at first. And this is the school on Olive Street that everyone called the Mexican school. And yeah, so that's, I just wanted to share that in case in case anyone's not familiar with the story or with the case. But yeah, I learned about it. I think it was in 2012, and I just thought that was a very important piece of American history that more people should know about, and wanted to make a book about it. And I got to meet Sylvia, and so it worked out very organically that I created this book.
Well, it's a beautiful book. I was wondering, how did you decide on the title?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually the title is one of the last things I write for a book, if not the last. I mean, I probably had, a working title. I just called it something
Mm-hmm.
for several months. But then I tried to, you know, think of a title that would capture people's attention, but also that kind of, that is a good summary of what the story is about. And I thought that kind of encapsulated. I mean, I'm not a lawyer or a legal scholar. One of there's a very important case, Plessy versus Ferguson, I believe it's called. I hope I'm not saying that wrong. But that sort of for many years upheld this idea of separate but equal, that you could have separate facilities as long as they're equal. But so I thought for me, it was like, even if it's the law, so to speak, separate is never equal, even if it's technically supposed to be, like to just have two different schools where one group of people go and another group of people go, just that by itself it's not, I don't think that can be, that is right. So that's another reason why I decided to call it that.
Okay, one of our friends, and just a reminder, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. One of our friends wants to know how old you were when you wrote this book.
How old was I? Let's see. 2014. I came out when I was 30 years old.
Okay.
But to make a book usually takes me about a year, sometimes longer. Because, first with this story, first I had to research it and kind of learn as much as I could about it. There's a very good documentary, the Sandra Roby documentary, and I believe she spoke here with the library recently. And there's been other projects, articles, different things about it. So I tried to learn as much as I could about it. I was able to find court transcripts. And so for in example, in the part where Mr. Kent is speaking, that comes directly, pretty much verbatim from things that were said during the case. But so, kind of trying to understand everything, collecting all that knowledge and information takes several months at least.
Mm-hmm.
Then I write the story and, it never comes out perfect the first time. I have to revise it. I share with my editor and, he gives me comments of, how to maybe structure the story better, things that are unclear, things that maybe I should explain more. And so that process takes several months. Then I do the drawings, just line drawings for the entire book. And then I collage textures and color into my illustrations. So to do that entire process takes about a year. So I was 30 when when the book came out, but I was probably 28, 29 when I first started working on it.
Okay, one of our friends wants to know, Kimberly would like to know, what inspired you to share your message with us today?
Well, as I was saying, when I heard the story, I thought that was a very important piece of American history, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to make the book. But another reason is that I think there are a lot of parallels between the segregation that existed in the 40s and maybe not segregation, but divisions that exist still today. And at the end of the book, I have an author note that talks a little bit about it. And even though, someone can say, oh, you can't come to this public school, you have to go to the Mexican school, there is a lot of division still. And if schools with more resources, with more teachers tend to be predominantly Anglo or white, and schools that have less resources, that have less teachers, where the majority of the students are poor, tend to be African American or Latino. And so I think there's still it's very different, but there are some parallels to schools nowadays than what it was in the 1940s and what it was 75 years ago. So that was another reason I thought it was relevant to children nowadays, and that they could relate to a lot of what happens in the story.
Yeah, definitely. So our friend Cora wants to know how many books you've written.
I have my 14th book coming out this fall in November. And well, out of those 14 books, I wrote 11 of them I've written, and 3 a different author wrote, and I only did the illustrations. My new book coming out in the fall. Here, I'll show you an image from it really quick. Let me just grab it. is going to be called A Land of Books, Dreams of Young Mexica Word Painters.
Oh, you kids saw it here first. This is exciting.
And it's about, my artwork is very inspired by Mesoamerican codices, by the artwork that people made hundreds of years ago before the Spanish and other Europeans came to this part of the world. And people in Mesoamerican times, they made books. There was this rich bookmaking tradition. And I've been inspired by those books and by those drawings for many years. That's why I have a very kind of peculiar way of drawing. My artwork is very much inspired by that art. And so for my latest book, I decided to make a book about the people that made those books, about the Tlacuiloque, the people that would make those. So that's what my latest project is about.
Oh, I think Duncan froze on us. I don't. Uh-oh. Well, let's give him a minute. He'll probably log back on. There he is. See?
Sorry about that. I'm not sure.
No, that's okay. It happens. That's really exciting. So I noticed in Separate but Equal, the characters, and in all your books, the characters have very peculiar ears. Can you tell us why you draw the ears that way, please?
Yeah, so it's inspired by pre-Columbian art, by Mesoamerican art. For example, these are drawings that the Mixtec people made hundreds of years ago. And you can see that the drawings are always in profile. We always see people looking to the side, never with both eyes looking straight ahead. And they had a very unique way of drawing ears. Maybe it's hard to tell here, but they I was inspired by the way they draw ears, by the way they draw hands. It comes from looking at this kind of artwork. That's why my art looks like that, why their ears look like that, why their hands look like that. I'm inspired by that artwork that the Mexica, the Mixtecs, the Maya made hundreds of years ago.
Melissa would like to know if you still have the original manuscript for Separate is Never Equal.
When I write, I usually write first in a notebook. So I'm not sure where that notebook is where I wrote it. Then I type it in a computer. And so I have all those manuscripts on my computer. And when I draw, I have my drawings. For example, I have this binder here full of the drawings that I did for Separate is Never Equal. And, I draw with a pencil, and then I go over my drawing with a pen. Okay. Sometimes I'll draw part of the drawing, like a little separate, in case I can move it, in case I want to include it or not. Would it be interesting if I showed you how I collage my illustrations? Would that be neat?
I think people would be interested. I know I'm interested.
So I make a drawing on a piece of paper, like the one I showed you. And then I have my scanner. You probably have a scanner in your school, in your library. Mine looks like this, has this cable that connects to the computer. And then I can put my drawing in there, and it sounds like this. And the drawing that I did on my scanner, now I can see on my computer screen. So let me share my screen again. Let me see. Can you see the drawing?
Yes.
So this is a drawing that I did. And I can scan drawings, but I can scan whatever I put on the scanner, inside the scanner. So here I have this folder full of all sorts of different textures of different things that I've scanned or photographed or images I found on the internet. And so this is a paper bag, the kind that you get at the supermarket to put your groceries in. And I like its texture, so I scanned it. And then here in this app, in this program called Photoshop, I can select it. I can copy it.
Oh, I think he froze again. Just give him a couple minutes so he can come back. There we are. Okay.
So yeah, so I use different textures. For example, this is a pair of jeans that I put there on the scanner, and then I can select it. I can copy it. I go back to my drawing, and I use this app, this program, Photoshop, and I paste into it, and those become the jeans. And I'll do her hair.
That's really awesome.
For hair, I could try and put my head inside the scanner and scan it that way. But instead of doing that, it's going to be kind of hard. I can use a photograph of someone's hair, or I can find one on the internet. I found this one of an Elvis wig that I like, and I can select it. I can copy it, and I go back here and paste into it. Oh, it's kind of small, so I have to stretch it out, rotate around a little, but that becomes her hair. And yeah, and so I use that process, that collage, to make my illustration. So if you look at the book, you'll see that for all the different areas, for their hair,
Right.
their clothes, I use that technique, and I call it digital collage, because it's kind of like making a collage, where you grab scissors and cut different magazines, different fabrics, different kinds of paper, and cut them and then glue them together. But instead of using scissors and glue, I use the computer.
Right. That's really awesome. Somebody wants to know what the silver circles on your book means, and so I'll let you explain what the silver circle means.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I have one right here. Well, this copy doesn't have it, but some of those, I've been very fortunate that some of my books have received an award, some awards, and that's why it has those stickers there. So, for example, Separate is Never Equal. It received a couple honorable mentions. One is from the Pura Belpre Award. One is from the Cyber Award. It won an award called the Americas Award. It won an award called the Tomas Rivera Mexican American Children's Award, an award called the Jane Addams Children's Book Award. And so I feel incredibly honored that the book has received those that recognition. And for me as an author and illustrator, it helps me a lot, because then, if you go into a library or a bookstore and you're not sure what book to pick out, if you see one that has a sticker, a lot of people say, well, other people think that this book is good, so maybe I'll check it out. So that those awards have helped give my book visibility. So I feel very grateful that they've been that Separate is Never Equal and other of my books have been recognized.
Glenn wants to know how old you were when you first started writing books, and then my question is, when you started writing books, did you ever think that you would get those silver circles that you've won?
Well, I first became interested in writing when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, at first, I was born in a city called in Mexico City, the capital of Mexico. Then I moved to a small city called San Miguel de Allende. And when I moved, I didn't know a lot of the kids in my neighborhood, the kids in my school. This is before everyone had a cell phone and the internet. And my family had sold the TV that we had in the apartment where we lived when we moved to San Miguel. So I would borrow a lot of books from my school library. I would borrow a book and read it, and a few days later take it back and read another one. They had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure that I enjoyed, these chapter books. And because I like reading, I thought maybe I could write a book. Maybe that's something that I can do. And that's when I first became interested in writing. And it's something that I kept doing. I especially did in high school and later on in college. I started doing it professionally right after I graduated from my university. When I was at my university is when I came up with my illustration style. And a teacher there really liked it. And she introduced me to a children's book editor. And he thought that my artwork was interesting. And I told him that I like writing too. And he said, well, maybe you could write a book for us for young readers. And that's when I did my first book. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a book called Dear Primo, a letter to my cousin. Mm-hmm. And that book came out in 2010, but like I said, it's a process to make the book. So I started working on it, I think, in 2008. So I've been doing it as a career for, more than 10 years now. for close to 15, less than 15 years, but more than 10. But I first became interested in writing when I was in elementary school. And to be honest, when I first made my books, when I first made Dear Primo, I thought I was going to win everything. I thought I was a genius. And then, so it was kind of the opposite. But then as I've kind of done it for more years and seen how hard work people work and just kind of been able to learn more about the industry and about other people's works and see that there's so many other great authors and illustrators, I've come to realize how extremely lucky I am that that my books have been recognized and have received awards. It's something very very special that I think when it first happened, I didn't kind of treasure it enough, so to speak. But now that I've kind of been doing it for longer, I really come to see just how special and how lucky I am.
All right. Olivia wants to know if you ever experienced anything like the type of bullying that Sylvia experienced at the beginning of this book.
That's a good question. Not really. I mean, I've been lucky or maybe a little naive. But I think there's different kinds of prejudice, different types of racism, and I think that, sometimes it can be something very obvious, like someone, literally pointing a finger at you and calling you names. But I think there's other kinds of prejudice and that I've experienced and that we often experience, which is more systemic, which has to do more with what we have access to, Sometimes it has to be, like I said, with schools, maybe they don't say you can't come to this school, but maybe the school you come to that you're able to attend has less resources, less teacher, less funding. And so that's a kind of way of having prejudice towards people, the access we have to, what we have access to, where we can live, where, what if we have access to good healthcare and things like that. That may not be someone calling your name, but it does affect your quality of life, so I've definitely experienced some of that.
Yeah. David wants to know which book that you have published is your favorite.
That's a question that I get often, and it's hard to choose one because I put a lot of effort into all of my books. So it's just hard to choose one. And there's different things about each book that I've made that I'm especially proud of. Separate is Never Equal is definitely my most well-known book. It's my most popular book. My first book, Dear Primo, is my book that I enjoy reading out loud the most, especially with younger readers. I did a book called Pancho and the Coyote. And I'm very happy with the text in that book because the story is a little bit like a fable, like the Little Red Riding Hood or the Gingerbread Man. But the book is also an allegory where the animals in the story represent people. So you can imagine the stories about animals, or you can imagine the stories about people, because the danger that Pancho Rabbit goes in the story are dangers that migrants often go through to reach the United States. So there's two ways to read that book. So I'm very proud of the writing in it. And for each book, there's different things that I'm especially happy about. I'm very happy with the artwork for this one coming out. Orlando books, and that I was sort of able to incorporate kind of images within images and use a lot of drawings that are very similar to the drawings that Mesoamerican people used. So for every project, there's things that I'm especially proud of.
I just want to mention that you all can get all of his books and check them out at the public library. This is my personal favorite, The Princess and the Warrior. I think when this came out, my head almost exploded. Because when we would go to Mexico City as a child, my dad would tell us, look at the mountains. We don't have these back home. And it's a beautiful book. So we have them all in the library if you all are interested. We also have another one that's also my favorite, Funny Bones, that I really, really like too. So if you all are curious, you all can come down to the public library and check them out. Somebody wants to know, Melissa, how did you become interested in art from Mesoamerica?
That's a good question. Let me grab something really quick.
Sure. While he's grabbing that, you can go to our online catalog to look up those books.
Yeah, so I grew up in Mexico, and when I was a kid, the artwork that I liked, the things that inspired me to draw were first it was comic books. Um, when I was 7, 8 years old, I liked Spider-Man and X-Men, and I had my collection of comic books, and my cousins did too, and we would get together and read comics, but we would try and draw our own superheroes, make up our own characters, and that's when I first started drawing. And then later after that, I like anime and manga, the Japanese cartoons with the big eyes, and I
Mm-hmm.
would try and draw in that style. Then later, I like political cartoons that I saw in newspapers, or cartoons that I saw like in Mad magazine, where they made fun of actors and different peoples, and I would try and make cartoons of my classmates, and they would all get really mad because I would draw with really big ears and teeth. Um, but when I was 15 years old, I came to the United States. I have family in both Mexico and the US. And so I ended up going to a high school in Massachusetts that was very arts oriented. And then later on to a design school in New York City where I studied art. But when I came to the US, as I spent more time in the United States, I began to miss things that were around me growing up in Mexico. The food, the music, different traditions. I began to miss those things, and for me, maybe realize that they were pretty special. Because when you're surrounded by something all the time, you just take it for granted. So maybe a holiday like the Day of the Dead, it was just something that happened every November 1st and 2nd. I never thought twice about it. But when I was in a different place where it wasn't celebrated as much, I began to see that was very unique and very different. And so I started becoming interested in the art of Mexico and the culture of Mexico and issues that affect people of Mexican origin on both sides of the border, because there's such a large Mexican and Mexican American community in the United States. And in my university, whenever I had assignments, if I was able to, I would connect them to my Mexican background, my Mexican heritage in some way. So, for example, I remember I had a photography class I took, and I decided to go and photograph this big May Day protest that was happening in New York City, and there were a lot of immigrants, and a lot of them were from Mexico, protesting for equal rights, for better rights, and then. I took a writing class, and I tried to write a short story that was set in San Miguel when I was a kid. And then my last year in school, I had to have a senior project. And I wasn't sure what to do. I thought maybe I can do kind of like a comic or a graphic novel. And I decided to make it about a friend that I met in New York named Sergio, who's from Mexico, but he's Mixtec. And Mixtec is an indigenous group. There's Mixtecs in the states of Guerrero, Puebla, Oaxaca, but there's also many of them have migrated to the U.S., and there's a large Mixtec community in the New York City area. And so I thought that maybe doing a project about his journey from this small village in Mexico to this large city in the United States would be interesting.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that I did was go to my university's library and look up Mixtec artwork. And in books, I found these kinds of images that I showed you. Where did I put it? Sorry, the book that I showed you with the ears and the fingers, that kind of artwork. And so then I decided that I wanted to do and I had seen that work as a kid growing up in San Miguel. But like I said, the things that I like were comic books, or anime, or manga. But after I lived in the United States for many years and I saw that artwork again, I was struck by it. And I decided that I wanted to do a modern day codex of my friend's story. So this is actually these kinds of drawings. And so this is actually my senior project. It got a little smudged, unfortunately, called Journey of a Mixteco. And that's when I came up with my illustration style.
Wow.
My friend Sergio telling his story on the subway of how, growing up in Guerrero and then coming to the US. But that's when I first became interested in Mesoamerican art, to be honest. It wasn't when I was a kid. It was later as an adult, after I had lived in the US for many years.
It was a case of absence made the heart grow fonder. Definitely. Yeah. So Annalise wants to know what inspired you to write about Sylvia Mendes.
Yeah, I mean, the two main things is, like I said, when I first learned about the case, I thought it was an important piece of American history that more people should know about.
Mhm.
A lot of people, many people know about Brown versus Board of
Right.
Education, which is a very important case that helped desegregate schools in all of the United States. But separate was never equal sort of paved the way. It was an important step towards Brown versus Board of Education. There are actually some of the people, one of the persons that sent a letter during the Mendes case was Thurgood Marshall, who was later involved in the in the Brown case, and Earl Warren, who was the governor of California that signed a law saying that children should be allowed to go to school together, was later a Supreme Court judge who ruled in the Brown case. So I just think that more people should know about this story also. That's very connected to the history of desegregation in the United States, and that's why I wanted to make it.
Yeah, it's a really important book, and I agree. I don't think a lot of people realize that that case happened. I don't think a lot of people realize who Ms. Mendez is and what her family went through. So it's definitely an important book. Ayema, what college did you go to, and did it help you with your book?
Yeah, so I went to a university called the New School University in New York City, and I went to that school because I could do art. They had a school within the university called Parsons School of Design, and there I did art, and I also did photography. I did drawing. I did different visual arts,
Mhm.
but I also wanted to do writing, and I was also interested in social studies, and so I could take class at another school that was part of the university called Eugene Lang. And so I actually got a degree from Parsons and a degree from Lang in writing. And so that's why I wanted to go to that school. And I wanted to be in a city because the high school that I went to in Massachusetts was in a small town. So I wanted to be in a big city now. Um, and but I went to that school so I could both write and illustrate, which were things that I've loved doing since I was in elementary school, since I was a kid. And and I think, I feel because I went to that university, it was definitely, I learned a lot about drawing and writing, and so I was very happy to take classes there. And I also met people that, like this teacher that liked my work. She had illustrated some children's books, and she introduced me to a person that made books. So it's also helpful that way in making connections. Um, it was a great resource, and I definitely recommend if you're interested in being an artist to go to an art school. I really enjoyed it.
So Jocelyn would like to know, since you mentioned that, do you like to write more or illustrate more? And have you illustrated books for other authors?
It's hard to choose one over the other, and I feel very lucky that because it's something that I've liked since I was a kid, both writing and drawing. I've been interested in both, and picture books are the perfect format for it, because I get to both write and illustrate. I want to continue both writing and illustrating. It's hard to choose one over the other. Most of the books I've made, I both wrote and illustrated, but a few of them I've made 3 books that a different author wrote, and I only did the illustrations. But I primarily write and illustrate. And when I write and illustrate, I can kind of go back between the text and the drawings a little bit, like I'll write and then I'll start drawing. And then because I draw, I'll be like, well, maybe I'll change this in the writing because like I'm already showing that in the drawing. When I use someone else's text, I can go back and change their writing. But sometimes other authors do things differently. And that sometimes has been an opportunity to try new things out. So that's the thing that I like about when I've illustrated books for other authors.
Okay, cool. Tom Torres wants to know if you have a daily mantra and what advice you would have for Latino children of today.
Do I have a daily mantra? Yeah, it's my daughter's name is Vida and my son's name is Maximo. So it's Vida, Maximo, time to get up.
I
And
think all parents can relate with that.
and what was the other question? Sorry.
And what advice do you have for Latino children of today?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
we're
There.
back.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for Latino children of today?
Um, well, I mean, I'm not sure if this is advice, but another reason why I'm an author, like I started making books that have to do um, with Mexican culture, Mexican American culture, Latino culture, because I missed things from Mexico when I moved to the U.S. and it was sort of a way to connect back with them. Um, Now that I've been making books for many years, I've also learned about the need for multicultural literature, and that in the U.S., there's thousands of books that come out every year for young readers, but of those books, only a small amount of them are about Latino children, African American children, Asian
Right.
American children.
Right.
Even though the United States is such a diverse country, the books that are published don't necessarily show that diversity. And I think it's very important to have books where people can see themselves reflected. I think when you read a book where you see some of your traditions reflected, um, maybe some of your experiences, it helps you know that those things are important, that those things matter, that your voice matters. So I think that's why it's important to have books where people can see themselves. And I think it's also important because for people that don't have those experiences, maybe it can create empathy and can create understanding. Um, and so I think that's another reason why it's important to have multicultural books. And so that's one thing that I find important. And I guess I don't know if it's necessarily advice, but just know that your experiences matter, your story matters. And I think that books can help, are one way to kind of affirm that, to know that. Um,
Yeah. A question. So this book has recently appeared on a list of banned books. So what is your response to that? That it's on a list of banned books?
yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. I feel it's a little bit of an elephant in the room, and I guess I haven't been
Oh,
thinking about it as much right now, but it was definitely much on my radar at the end of last year, and or earlier this year. Um, yeah, I mean, it's strange, it's sad. Like I said, the book came out 7 years ago, so it's not a brand new book.
right. Exactly. Now you're going to ban it.
And so it's the response that I've had for it for years and years has been so positive. And um, and when I read the book to kids, kids tell me the response I usually get is, that's not fair, that's not how you should treat people. They're
Right.
outraged by the situation, they see the injustice in the situation. I think kids care very much about what is right. um,
Yeah.
Another response I get sometimes is more from teachers or librarians that say, I wish there were books like this when I was a kid. I wish there were books that talk about our history, especially if they're Latino,
Exactly.
Mexican American.
Yes.
Um, the criticism that people have given to the book is that I guess it makes white children feel bad, or even like Mexican children feel bad. But like I said, that's not the experience that I've had. The experience that I've had is that they are, um, you know, um, they think that it's not right. They see the injustice in the story. One of the reasons why I write books for children, for young readers, is that I feel they have to have a hopeful message. I don't think that books need to have a happy ending. I don't think they need to be happy necessarily.
Right.
But I do think they need to be hopeful. It can be like, this was terrible, the end. And so in the book, it starts with the boy pointing at Sylvia, but the book ends with the children playing together. And that's what I try. That's what the
Right.
message of the book is, that kids should be allowed to go to school together, to be able to interact together. So, like I said, it's sad. I could get into it a little bit more. I mean, I think it's totally politically driven, you know, um, and um, and I think it's really frustrating because, like I said, there's this lack of diversity in the books that get published. There's not enough books about Latino history, for example, that get published. And if of those books you're already going to ban and censor them and make it difficult, make it complicated for people to have access to them or be worried about teaching them, of that small amount, you're making it even smaller. I think it's a terrible thing, and I think it's very I completely disagree with it, and I think it's misguided. I'm open to criticism. I don't think that my work is perfect, and I think things can always be done better or whatnot, but I think in this case, it's primarily these bans are politically driven. I mean, it's all over the country at the same time. It's clearly it's political, and it's very sad that it's very frustrating.
Right. Well, I wanted to read to you a comment from Flor Dimas that says, we used that book in a Black and Brown parent mentoring unity workshop. Black parents were surprised that this happened in history and began asking why they didn't teach this as well. Wonderful conversation took place with the book that is considered for children. Your books are great tools to teach our untold history in a very digestible way. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I appreciate that, and I think like I said, books are important to see ourselves, but also to learn about others and to see the connections. There's also, I think when students learn about the civil rights, there's very important icons, Martin Luther King's, Rosa Parks, but there's also all sorts of other heroes, that are maybe not as well known, that fought different battles, and lots of different people that were going through similar experiences. And I think it's very important to kind of make those connections and see that it took courageous people to change the situation. I mean, that's another thing that I hope kids get out of it, that change doesn't just happen magically. It takes people to actually take it on to create a better world.
And we have time for one last question. So I guess I'm going to ask you, what was it like meeting Sylvia Mendes? What else did she have to say? Did she remember much, since this happened when she was so young?
Yeah, I mean, when I met her, she's a super kind lady, super nice. She was always very approachable. Actually, after I made the book, or while I was working on the book, I got a chance to visit her in California, in Fullerton, where she lives. And she shared with me she gave me permission to use the pictures that I've included in the back of the book. So she's been super supportive, and she's very active herself. She travels a lot to speak about this case and about education in general. There were many other families involved in the case, but I think Sylvia really kind of took it on to kind of spread the word, so to speak. I mean, she told me that she was a nurse for many years, and then she retired to take care of her mom, who became ill. And when her mom was sick, she told her that she was very sad that no one knew kind of about this case and what they had fought for. And so then after her mother passed away, she decided that she wanted more people to know about it and to learn about it. So she's incredibly active, and she speaks a ton all over the country, all over the United States, about this case and about education in general. So, but yeah, she's a super nice and approachable and friendly person. I was very happy that I got to meet her and ask her questions.
Well, thank you for answering all in this book with us. It's really wonderful. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now.
Thank you so much, Duncan, for joining us today from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. I want to also thank the Las Palmas Elementary Bobcats for all of their excellent questions. And hey, Bobcats, pause up. I also want to thank the San Antonio Public Library for partnering with us again today on this second Mendez versus Westminster event to commemorate, again, the 75th anniversary. And I know 75 years might seem like a long time, but it's really not that long ago that schools were legally segregated. And in the Southwest, that often meant separate Mexican schools, separate African-American schools, and sometimes separate Asian schools. So that's something that, we can't forget that happened. Macri regularly hosts virtual events to expand the public's knowledge of Mexican-American civil rights history. And in fact, we have another event coming up tonight about the history of Mexicans in Chicago called Making Mexican Chicago. This is with Dr. Mike Amezcua from Georgetown University. We'd love to see you back later tonight. But thank you so much for spending time with us today, and I hope that we'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you very much.